Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about speaking ill of the dead. So I'm filming this the day after right-wing influencer, public figure, provocateur, whatever you want to call him, Charlie Kirk was shot and killed. And I have thoughts about Charlie Kirk and his legacy in the US, his impact on our national politics, his relative morality, his whether or not he deserved what happened to him, etc., etc. But that is not what this video is about. This video is about a rhetorical phenomenon that has resurfaced with this. This is a thing that I've observed repeatedly in political discourse. And it's this concept that you don't speak ill of the dead. So when someone, a political figure particularly, dies, whether that's a natural death or a violent death, and I'm talking about this in a US context here. This is not necessarily true across the world, but there is a phenomenon in which, by and large, people across the political spectrum, no matter their actual opinion or how they engaged with that person in their life, whatever it is, that everybody across the board will say nice things about that person to greater or lesser extents. Somewhat, so two caveats to this. First off, somewhat, the far right has given this up. Because the far right in the US has embraced political violence much more readily than any other sort of political demographic has, right? And so, whereas it used to be beyond the pale to celebrate the death or violence against a political opponent, the far right in the US now regularly does that. The other caveat to this is that this is not an observation about social media and average people's responses, right? Average people will very, very often celebrate the death of someone that they view as on the other side or a danger to their specific community. Sometimes those celebrations are more grounded in reality and justifiable than others. But that is a separate thing. What I'm talking about is a rhetorical move used by the majority of political figures, right? So even if this was a person that in life you viewed them as absolutely anathema to everything you politically stand for, as soon as they are dead, you are obliged politically to post about what a good person they were and how much their legacy is important for the country and all their positive values, etc., etc. And this is a form of not speaking ill of the dead, right? This is a concept that is pervasive across multiple cultures. I would say most human cultures have some variation of this, whether it is rooted in a culture of sort of ancestor worship and veneration, as it is in many cultures, in which one's ancestors are an incredibly important and influential force in this world, whether this is rooted in a belief in the power of ghosts and spirits to come back and either positively help someone or exact revenge on someone. Or whether this is rooted in a sense that I want my legacy to be remembered positively. I want myself to be remembered positively, and so I engage in this practice of saying good things, eulogizing. Literally, the word eulogy comes from the Greek, meaning good word, right? I want good words said about me after I have died. And so I engage in that practice out of a sort of faith in the reciprocity of the universe, right? That if I say good things now about those who have died. When I die, people will say good things about me, right? So for me, those seem to be the three major causes of the cultural need to speak positively about the dead, right? Either ancestor worship, you have a culture in which the veneration of ancestors is incredibly important, belief in ghosts and spirits, and that speaking ill of the dead may draw negative spirits to you, or a desire to preserve one's own legacy. Are these particularly compelling reasons that stand up to scrutiny? Maybe. Maybe not, though. Part of the problem becomes that the scrutiny one might apply to any of these reasons depends on the set of cultural assumptions that one brings to the question. Right? So, if you believe that the spirits of your ancestors need to be venerated and honored and sacrificed to and whatever it is, then it's perfectly rational not to speak ill of the dead, right? It makes perfect sense. But if you don't believe that, if you believe, for instance, that when people die, they just die, that's it. There's nothing else. Their spirit does not go on. They cannot, we as still living people cannot appeal to our ancestors for help or to influence the events of this world, etc., then it's completely irrational. It makes no difference whatsoever whether we say bad things about the dead. The same thing with ghosts and spirits, right? If you start from the assumption that there is an immortal part of us as human beings, and that immortal part transcends the death of the body, then there are any number of possibilities of what happens to that immortal part. And since we can't know for sure, it is quite possible that one outcome is they come back as a spirit or a ghost or a poltergeist or whatever it is. And so if you assume that that is a possibility, and rationally, without any actual evidence of what happens to us after death, we can't say for sure that that doesn't happen. Now, to say, this is of course an important caveat to that statement, to say that we cannot for sure say that this doesn't happen doesn't mean that we should believe that it does, but it opens up the possibility. So if you start from that assumption, right, the belief that there may be an afterlife and that the souls of the departed or whatever it is may be able to return to the world and haunt us or whatever it is, then yeah, you have an incentive not to speak ill of the dead. And if you assume that by not speaking ill of the dead, you can, in some, again, reciprocal way, preserve your own legacy, that people will not speak ill of you because you have not spoken ill of others, to a certain extent, that's rational, right? To the extent that that norm exists within a society, and you expect people to observe that norm, yeah, that's reasonable. It doesn't ensure it, of course. And this is, again, where this sort of question of uncertainty comes in, right? I can say, well, I want my legacy preserved. I want to make sure that people remember me in a positive way. And so I'm going to contribute to a culture in which we remember the dead positively, regardless of how unpositive their actions during life might be. And this is where this one really gets interesting for me, right? Because if the objective is to be remembered positively, but all that you really want is for people to say nice things about you, as opposed to people actually having a positive impression of your life, then you don't really want to be remembered. You want to be idealized or mythologized, right? You want essentially lies to be told about you. And this is sort of the thing, right? Like, for me, for my money, the best way, if you want to be remembered positively, if you want people to have a positive impression of you after you die, would be to lead a virtuous and ethical life rooted in compassion and the desire to help others. Right? I mean, that's kind of one of the best ways of securing a positive legacy for yourself. Whereas if what you want is to be able to do whatever you want, hurt whoever you want, create whatever sort of damage in the world you want, but have people say nice things about you after your death, chances are people will say performatively nice things about you, but they won't believe it. Right? I mean, because this is the thing, right? This is going to sound perhaps callous, but the world would be better off without certain people in it, right? Certain people do such massive harm to the world. And I'm not singling Charlie Kirk out here. I'm not saying that necessarily, but like people, I mean, the classic examples, right? Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, Mao, Pol Pot, Pinochet, people like this. The world, and I'm not advocating for killing these people, right? I'm not saying that. I don't endorse political violence, as everybody who talks about this topic says, and it is, I think, generally true for most of us. But like the world as a whole would have been better off if people like Hitler or Pol Pot had never been born. And I don't know that that's that controversial a statement, right? They did so much horrendous damage to the world, to human society as a whole, that no positive that came out of their life, their experience, whatever it is, could outweigh the number of deaths that they caused, the amount of suffering that they caused, the amount of division and dehumanization that they caused, right? And there's obviously not a clear line of demarcation here, right? It's not like at some point you like hit an objective thing where you become too evil and it's now better if you had never existed. Obviously, that's not the case, but like the principle of not speaking ill of the dead. So first off, I'll also add this. Not first off, because I'm 13 and a half minutes into this video, but you know what I'm saying, right? So the principle of not speaking ill of the dead obviously doesn't apply to historians, in that historians often assess the legacy of important political figures, military leaders, social leaders, etc., right? We often have assessments of them. Were they good? Were they bad? What did they do that was good? What did they do that was bad? Etc., etc. And there is no sort of impulse, no mandate when writing a biography of, say, Mussolini to speak well of Mussolini just because he's dead, right? Like that impulse doesn't guide historiography, doesn't guide the study of history. But the notion that even if someone has been objectively harmful to large segments of the population, we politically must say nice things about them and discuss them as though they have a positive legacy. It's a striking rhetorical move, right? And it seems to be rooted in And I'm not saying we should speak ill of the dead. I don't think there's a positive value to that necessarily. I do think we should speak honestly about people and their legacies, their impact on the world, because I think honesty is generally a positive thing. The idea that we shouldn't speak ill of the dead and that is in and of itself an important value, I do think is rooted in a number of questionable assumptions.